There was this moment about 20 years ago when it looked like there might be a chance to make our immigration system work.
Together we can make sure el sueño americano es para todos que viven en este país.
Bush really wanted this to happen.
Dr. Jorge Castaneda was the foreign minister of Mexico at the time. Teams from the U.S. and Mexico had been working on an immigration agreement for months.
And so we had this dinner, which was very pleasant.
And this dinner, it came at the end of a very positive visit between George W. Bush and the Mexican president Vicente Fox in Washington, D.C.
You know, everybody in coat and tie, but we were all tight. I was sitting at a corner, I remember, and the visit had really been very successful. Some of these visits don't end up well because there's a hitch or because something happens or there's not good vibes. On the contrary, everybody was very happy. Everybody was very satisfied with the way things had gone. And this last dinner was just a little bit of a wrap-up, but also a little bit on my side to try and see what more we could move forward during that last chance I had. I was sitting next to Condoleezza.
That's Condoleezza Rice, who, at the time, was National Security Advisor to President Bush.
And we started scribbling notes on a napkin.
These scribbles, they sold a big vision, one that could potentially, over 20 years, take the number of Mexicans in the U.S. without legal status down to zero.
And I had the impression that Condoleezza was very interested in this. All of a sudden, she saw that this was doable because it was not only something that was in principle agreeable to the United States, but that Bush could sell to the Congress, both to Republicans and to Democrats.
That was September 5th, 2001. So do you remember where you were on September 11th?
Yes, I remember very well.
After their dinner in D.C., Castaneda and the others flew to Miami for another gathering with the president's brother, Jeb Bush, then on to Lima, Peru. All of the foreign ministers of the Americas were due to sign something called the Inter-American Democratic Charter.
Very important document at the time. It ended up not being very important, but we thought it was at the time. So we all met there. Everybody was there. Powell was there. Everyone was there. And early in the morning on television, we all began to see what was happening.
American 11, are you trying to call?
I am a situation with American 11, a possible hijack.
A terrible, terrible tragedy has befallen my nation, but has befallen all the nations of this region, all the nations of the world, befallen all those who believe in democracy.
We all sort of rushed downstairs to the meeting room. We asked the Peruvian hosts, asked Colin Powell what he wanted to do. And he very nobly said, look, we're here to sign this, so let's sign the thing. And then obviously I'll run off to Washington as soon as I can, but I want to get this thing done. That's why we're here. And we want to keep this commitment. And we all were very touched by that. And we all expressed our solidarity with him, with Bush, and with the American people. And once it was over, we all had to find a way to get home because, you know, air travel was suspended in much of the Western Hemisphere.
When, after that time, did you first have the sense that the immigration deal, that the prospects had changed?
Well, right away, practically. I mean, it was almost, even in Lima with several of my aides there, I said, look, this is going to make this very difficult for us.
Castaneda was right. The immigration agreement they'd worked so hard on, it never went through. And although almost every president since has tried, none has gotten us as close as we were in 2001. I'm Lacey Healy, and today on Things That Go Boom, we ask why our country is so stuck on immigration and who's really calling the shots. Hey, it's Lacey. As you likely already know, we are living in the golden age of cybercrime. How can we ensure the security of our information and our financials, not to mention our peace of mind? Well, I recommend listening to What the Hack with Adam Levin. It's a weekly true crime podcast featuring tales of hacks, scams, and a rattlebag of cyber swindles. Learn about the dangers of trolling opponents, discover what sort of links you should never, ever click, and get the inside scoop on all sorts of crazy scams happening on your favorite apps. So go ahead, Follow What the Hack with Adam Levin on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. 9/11 didn't just tank Bush's immigration deal. It heightened Americans' focus on national security, and partly as a result, it unleashed a giant wave of money. Cristina Rodriguez is an immigration law expert at Yale.
The reality today is that federal immigration enforcement is better funded, has a larger budget than any other federal law enforcement activity, and then all other federal law enforcement activities combined.
Immigration was identified as a security risk after the government determined that the 9/11 hijackers had all entered the U.S. on valid visas, and that some of them obtained those visas using false documents.
So one of the responses to 9/11 was to create various new bureaucracies that would better manage intelligence sharing and national security screening. And part of the rationale was that that would better enable the federal government to screen for security risks and to share the information that was necessary to protect the borders.
22 existing agencies and sub-agencies were merged to create the Department of Homeland Security. Everything from immigration and customs to counterterrorism and the Secret Service.
The effect, though, of the creation of the Department of Homeland Security and the linking of border security in particular to national security has been to only deepen the enforcement logic at the heart of the immigration system and to make events like influxes of refugees or the appearance of potential asylum seekers at the border appear like threats to national security or appear as national security problems that need to be managed through screening, detention, and removal.
National security has always been part of immigration. Go all the way back to the Alien and Sedition Acts, which gave President Adams the power to deport immigrants. But after 9/11, the U.S. created a deportation and border security machine that is truly enormous, which brings us to today.
We must control the southern border and take control of a crisis that is truly deteriorating our country.
At the very least, allow our immigrant neighbors to not be harassed and allow them to travel and allow them to live in peace.
At the conclusion of that sentence, he was released from the Bureau of Prisons to a known sanctuary jurisdiction for the ostensible.
The immigration enforcement debate in the U.S. rests on two big questions. One, what do we do with the people who are already in the U.S. without legal status? And two, what do we do at the border? If you listen to campaign ads, you'd think these are questions that Congress is so ready to tackle. But it's not that simple. Congress can set the rules for who is allowed in, but it's up to the executive branch to enforce them. Today, there are millions of people that the U.S. could theoretically deport. But even the biggest and richest federal law enforcement agency can't deport 11 million people all at once.
The decision about what to do about that population is not set out in the statutes that Congress has enacted. It belongs in the discretion of the executive branch and the president. So immigration policies like DACA and other non-enforcement or under-enforcement policies that have shaped the immigration debate over the last several decades have emanated from the president's discretionary authority to determine how and when is the country going to remove these non-citizens who are present.
The president, not Congress, sets the day-to-day priorities about how to enforce the law. So when President Obama created the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival System, or DACA, he was telling those immigrants and the whole immigration enforcement system that people who entered the country when they were children are not a deportation priority.
And let's be honest, tracking down, rounding up, and deporting millions of people isn't realistic. Anyone who suggests otherwise isn't being straight with you. And that's why we're going to keep focusing enforcement resources on actual threats to our security. Felons, not families. Criminals, not children. Gang members, not a mom who's working hard to provide for her kids.
But then Trump came in and said, no way.
We either have a country or we don't have a country. We have at least 11 million people in this country that came in illegally. They will go out.
These big swings between administrations don't just create uncertainty and instability. they leave millions of people vulnerable. Without legal status, housing security, workplace protections, and the ability to go to the police, they all fall apart. But presidents have been stuck using their enforcement discretion to change immigration policy because their power to do more is limited.
Some of the things that presidents can't do. They cannot give somebody a green card if there's not a provision in law that would give somebody a green card.
That's Teresa Cardinal Brown. She's the managing director of immigration and cross-border policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington, D.C.
They really can't give a broad legalization to people in the United States. They can't grant a legal status that somebody is not otherwise entitled to under law. They can't change the number of green cards available each year. You can't give more green cards than are authorized under statute.
More permanent solutions require action from Congress, and that makes things tricky. Ever hear of comprehensive immigration reform? Well, one reason we keep seeing Congress attempt to tackle border security and worker verification and legalization and new visa policy all at once is that Democrats and Republicans have had very different priorities for a very long time.
If you go back to the 1986 so-called amnesty bill that was signed by President Reagan, it was the Immigration Reform and Control Act, the two main pillars of that bill were a broad legalization for many of the folks in the United States, but then the other half of it was imposing employer sanctions to reduce the jobs magnet for future migration and beefing up the Border Patrol. And one of the things Republicans like to say is that we got the amnesty, but we didn't get the enforcement out of IRCA.
But attempting to update immigration laws now is dangerous for lawmakers. Taking a public stand on an issue like legalization can put a legislator at risk of losing their seat.
A political newcomer may have pulled off one of the most stunning upsets.
One of the most stunning upsets.
The most stunning primary election upsets in congressional history.
Even powerful politicians like former House Majority Leader Eric Cantor have been taken down by challengers who used an association with immigration reform as a weapon.
Brett had far less funding than Cantor, but he was apparently able to capitalize on his criticisms of the number 2 House leader, including charges that he was soft on immigration.
For Democrats, the most important thing for them to get done is legalization for as many as possible of the 11 million undocumented people in the United States. That is their number one priority. For Republicans writ large, and it's not true for every Republican, I'm generalizing, but for Republicans writ large, their number one priority is what I will call reducing the chance of having to do legalization again. They usually interpret that to mean border security.
Congress did pass an immigration bill during the Clinton administration, and border security was a big part of it. But it backfired. Instead of reducing the number of undocumented people in the U.S., folks who had been migrating between the U.S. and Mexico for seasonal work now found the border crossing too difficult and dangerous. So instead of going home to their families in Mexico, they decided to settle down, stay for a while, and bring their families along too. As a result, the number of undocumented people in the U.S. more than doubled. Pair that bad experience with the fact that Democrats aren't exactly chomping at the bit to look tough on illegal immigration, and there isn't much common ground left.
I think what has shifted is that both parties have become much more homogenous in their viewpoints, and that homogeneity is at the opposite ends of the policy spectrum. So Democrats as a whole have become much more a solid pro-immigration party, and Republicans have, especially post-Trump, solidified as a much more, I would say, immigration restriction hardline party.
Build that wall, build that wall, build that wall, build that wall.
Teresa said that after 9/11, we didn't just pivot to enforcement. The border also became much more militarized.
Like literally militarized, like defense contractors moving into the Homeland Security space, Border Patrol inheriting surplus Defense Department equipment.
We're talking robot dogs, drones, high-flying blimps. And all of that new equipment, it was easy for Congress to greenlight. Here's Christina again.
I think that it has long been a political calculation that if the border seems like it's out of control, that the federal government has lost its way. And that logic is really hard to work against. It's why even when you have an administration that purports to be committed to humanitarian protection, that commitment can easily be swallowed by the events of the day.
The United States' moral leadership on refugee issues was a point of bipartisan consensus for so many decades when I first
So the White House says that they inherited a completely gutted immigration system from the Trump administration.
The Biden administration has not moved forward with increasing the number of refugees that we will resettle in the United States.
After the break, we meet an asylum seeker who is living right in the middle of this debate. And we dig into what immigration might look like in the future. When there's an uptick in people trying to cross the U.S. border, we often hear about a border crisis, about lawlessness. Like clockwork, the Sunday shows, they start airing segments alleging people are traveling to commit crimes or find illegal work. But that's not the whole picture. Not even close. Yes, a lot of people who want to move to the U.S. are coming in through the U.S. border, but more and more, they're also chasing survival, coming to the U.S. to escape dangerous situations all over the world. The latest example, Venezuelan asylum seekers.
As you guys see, over 100 migrants are crossing this river here in Del Rio, Texas. Children, women.
The United States stopped over 24,000 Venezuelans at the border just in December 2021.
¿Me escuchas ahí más fuerte? ¿Se escucha mejor?
This is Juan Pablo Barrios. He goes by Pablo, and he's young, just 28. I spoke to him with the help of an interpreter, Gustavo.
And if you see me typing here or something, I'm just making notes so that I can remember what you're saying, okay? Si me ven aquí escribiendo algo, no estoy distraído, estoy nada más tomando notas de lo que están diciendo para poderlo traducir, okay?
Pablo came from Venezuela and crossed the U.S. border in October.
Sí, el río me llegaba aquí, esta área aquí.
And he says, I don't know what part of the river I chose to cross, but water reached all the way to here.
He's holding his hand up to his neck with his chin tilted up to show us just how deep the Rio Grande was where he crossed near Del Rio, Texas. Wow. You can hear him laughing off the deep water, even though he told us that crossing did feel a bit dangerous. But the real danger he kept mentioning was what he felt at home, in a place that used to be really nice. Can you describe your hometown for me, the place you come from?
Yo soy originario del estado Zulia. Eso es lo que se llama la costa oriental del lago de Maracaibo, de un pequeño pueblo.
Okay, he says he's from the state of Zulia, from a little town called Los Puertos de Altagracia, the ports of Altagracia. It's a fishing town, a town of fishermen, but mostly it's a very beautiful town. But those who remain there, many people have already left because there are so many problems. Insecurity, organized crime, even dealing with the government. He says it's a very tranquil place, a very calm place. But, and that's how he grew up. But as the years went on, all that happiness was erased.
Pablo told us that he used to do what we do. He used to produce a radio show called Más Lo Mismo with some colleagues in Venezuela that covered politics, entertainment, and culture. But that one day, government officials came and confiscated all their equipment because the show wasn't aligned with the government's views.
Yes, he says it was truly political. They just show up, took all the equipment, and shut us down, and that was it.
After the station was shut down, Pablo went to university to study journalism and started organizing for the rights of fishermen in his community. There was an oil spill from a ship called the Plate Princess in 1997, and people in his community still have not been compensated for the related damages. After a while, though, between violence from literal pirates and corrupt government officials targeting the fishing community, Pablo decided he couldn't safely continue his organizing work and had to leave the country. How long was that journey?
El viaje alrededor me tomó de 4 días. Fue peligroso.
Okay, so he's saying that the trip took him about 4 days. I live like about 4 hours away from the Colombian border. I drove my car. It was very complicated because the government has all these checkpoints to take people's money away, you know. And then I took a bus to Barranquilla and then a flight to Bogota. And from Bogota, I took a flight to Mexico City. And from Mexico City, I started traveling to Monterrey, and then from Monterrey to Ciudad Acuña, and that's where I looked for the border control checkpoint, but I couldn't find it. So I crossed the river, the Rio Grande or Rio Bravo. I looked in Google Maps just to see where Acuña was and to see where the border was, where Texas was, and I just crossed. You know, it says I saw Acuña on this side, and I crossed running. He says that prior to crossing, he saw photos and videos to see more or less how people did it.
El agua está un poco fría. Creo que es mejor por acá, ¿no? Porque aquí está resbaloso. Este es el Río Bravo.
But even with his preparation, Pablo says he crossed at a spot where the river was split by some land. So he really had to cross the river twice. And then, once he was on the other side, he saw a sign.
He saw a sign that said help. So he approached the sign, and then lo and behold, it was Texas police. And then he says, I told them that I was Venezuelan. I wanted to request asylum. And they told me, relax. And then shortly after, they started reading him his rights and telling him that he's arrested because he tried to come across into the country illegally. And he says, no, I didn't want to cross illegally. I just wanted to find the window where I can request asylum.
According to Pablo, he was arrested as part of a program in Texas called Operation Lone Star and charged with trespassing. In December 2021, the ACLU filed a complaint with the Department of Justice saying that Operation Lone Star was discriminatory. The complaint also alleges that as part of the program, Texas police lured people on to private or state-owned property so that they could bring trespassing charges. Pablo was detained for 29 days.
29 days dressed in orange, he said. He said that he only talked to an attorney secretary, and that they told him that he had a $5,000 bail, but that he didn't know anything else, that he wasn't allowed to make phone calls, that every time he would ask when he would be released, they would tell him 6 months to a year. Nobody knows. Stop asking, just be quiet and be relaxed. And then all of a sudden, on the 28th, he was told that the charges were dismissed and he was handed over to immigration.
This was obviously not part of the plan. Pablo told us that it was very confusing to sort out a legal case in Texas before he even got a chance to apply for asylum.
From his understanding, it was something that Governor Abbott enacted abruptly or all of a sudden, and that the judge at Valverde was the one who was handling all the cases. And when he saw the number and the number of immigrants who were there and how everything was running out of control, they started dismissing charges and liberating people. And he was one of the first people whose charges were dismissed and was released.
If this story about the state of Texas detaining an asylum seeker for a month on trespassing charges feels wrong to you, you're not alone. There are a lot of competing ideas about exactly how to manage the border and how to dissuade people without legal status from trying to enter.
We have done actually a very good job at securing the border in a lot of ways. And yet we're still seeing large migration flows coming now. And so you do have to kind of think, what more would we have to do if we wanted to deter more people? And I do think that the American public has made known some of the limits of what they think is acceptable.
Families belong together! Families belong together!
So when President Trump started taking children away from parents, frankly, in an effort to deter people from coming, the public, Republicans and Democrats, stood up and said, nope, this is not acceptable. This is not America. We're not going to rip kids from their parents in an effort to deter them from migrating. And Trump, had to rescind that policy and backtrack on it. And I think that should make leaders think about, okay, so there is a limit to what people will find okay to do in the name of securing the border.
When the American public, state governments, Congress, and the president all disagree, the last place to work things out becomes the courts.
Hawaii is now the first state to sue, trying to stop President Trump's revised travel ban.
Paxton is suing the Biden administration over the administration's immigration policy.
Back here at home, President Biden vowing to fight back after a federal judge in Texas ruled that the DACA program is unlawful.
What we're seeing now, and actually this started during the Obama administration, is lawsuits not on behalf of individual cases, but states' attorneys general or national organizations suing an administration over an entire policy. And a lot of this is happening because Congress is at that stalemate.
So that's what I wanted to ask you next was exactly, does it feel like the courts have taken the place of Congress in regulating the president's power on immigration?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When Congress is not legislating on an issue, executives from both parties will take advantage of whatever executive authority they believe they have to try to implement those policies as best they can under the law. And those are often very partisan lawsuits, too. So President Trump was regularly sued by Democratic states' attorneys general, and President Biden is being sued by Republican states' attorneys general. So the fractious politics is now inserting itself into the courts. And the federal courts are being asked essentially to intervene in what are, I think, essentially political differences, which is a place where courts have generally tried not to weigh in, but they're being asked to now.
It all adds up to a game of political ping pong. The president can protect lots of refugees like Pablo. Past presidents did the same for groups like Hungarians and Cubans fleeing persecution. But he keeps getting sued. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, Congress could greenlight a minimum number of refugees to accept each year. But Congress is notoriously bad at getting bills passed, especially around immigration. Last October, when Pablo crossed the border, he walked right into the middle of this deadlock. Around then, Biden had tried to terminate the Migrant Protection Protocol, or MPP, also known as the Remain in Mexico program. It forced asylum applicants to wait in Mexico until the U.S. was ready to process their claim. But Texas sued, and the order was reinstated. At the same time, Governor Abbott in Texas tried to launch Operation Lone Star, and now he is facing a lawsuit. And so the whole thing, it just goes back and forth, with no meaningful movement in any direction.
Of course, during the Trump administration, we saw lawsuits over the Muslim ban. Just about every policy that President Trump tried to put in place had some form of legal action. His moves to terminate DACA, all of them went to court. And now President Biden, he's been sued over his 100-day deportation moratorium that he tried when he was first put in office. He's been sued over the termination of MPP. He's been sued over the revised interior enforcement priorities that he's given Immigration and Customs Enforcement about who they should be going after to arrest inside the United States for immigration violations. All of those cases have resulted in the administration having to roll back or change policy directions that they had very much wanted to go.
Teresa did say that there's still hope for immigration reform during Biden's term. He does have 3 more years. But in the meantime, immigrants and asylum seekers like Pablo are still navigating our complex, unpredictable system as best they can. And now, what is an average day like for you? Can you describe what it's like in Staten Island?
El cambio es radical. Verdaderamente, sí, el cambio es radical.
It's a radical change. It's a very beautiful city, Brooklyn, Manhattan, New York. It's all beautiful. He also says, I'm a volunteer at Una Carta Salva una Vida, a letter saves a life, with other migrants from Venezuela and other migrants who are arriving into the region. I'm also currently taking English classes because I didn't know any English. I didn't have any education in English. And I'm also waiting on my asylum request. I'm also waiting for my work permit. I still don't have a work permit. He says, I see myself solving my legal situation in this country. That's the immediate future. But in 5-10 years, I would like to retake my career in media. I would like to become an entrepreneur here in the United States. I would like to do PR or advertising. I would like to open up a restaurant. I would like to have a family. These are the things that I couldn't do in Venezuela, and I would like to do them here. but it's also like starting a new life, starting from zero, starting from scratch. And everything that Venezuela took away from us, we have to take it back, or we have to get it back in this country, in this new land.
Pablo has an asylum hearing scheduled for this coming July. Things That Go Boom is produced by Inkstick Media and distributed by PRX. This episode was produced by Nikki Galtaland and me, and edited by Katie Toth, Christina Stella, and Layla Ujelu. As always, Darian Schulman writes the music for our show, and Robin Wise makes each episode sound its very best. Thank you so much to the supporters and foundations that make our work possible. The Carnegie Corporation of New York and Plowshares Fund, as well as Inkstick supporters, including the Colomb Foundation, Craig Newmark Foundation, Prospect Hill Foundation, and the Jubitz Family Foundation. If you're listening and like what we do, please don't forget to head on over and leave us a review, and come and visit us anytime on social at Inkstick Media. We'd also like to note that our conversation with Pablo should not be understood as a full account of his case for asylum. He'll be speaking with a lawyer and presenting the details of his case in July. If you or someone you know needs legal assistance related to immigration or asylum, we've included some resources in our show notes. And please also check out the show notes if you want to dig deeper into the story of the Plate Princess oil spill in Venezuela, listen to Teresa's fabulous podcast, This Week in Immigration, or read any one of the incredibly informative books written by Christina or Jorge. We have a bunch of useful links waiting there for you, as always. We'll see you right back here in 2 weeks.
Trump at least was sincere. He said, we're going to shut this down by building a wall. And we're going to shoot everybody or have them eaten by crocodiles, by alligators, if they come through. All right, that was not approved.